fellow philomaths, researchers. Well, I'm going to break down for you my experience between PMAs and trusts and tell you how and why I got into both of them. All right, let's start with PMAs because that's what I got into first. And both of the cities that I was living between implemented a vaccine passport. You could not go out in public unless you showed proof of vaccine. That is BS to me. So a bunch of us in the Midwest got together and we started researching PMAs. We knew of a farmer that had been raided for selling raw milk, and then they went under a PMA. So that is what got us starting to research. We wanted to open a clubhouse to make sure that we could still have parties and still live our best life and not have to have any of these, stupid mandates of masks or vaccines. A 501c3, which is the public nonprofit. A 508c1a is a PMA. That's a private membership association. As a group, you write your own constitution. It's really easy. You never have to file anything with the IRS. We eventually worked with David Edwards and Law for Mankind and set up our own PMA and a clubhouse. My experience with a PMA is it was super easy. Very similar to setting up an LLC on the public side. It's really just the paperwork, bylaws, articles of association, trying to think of all of the possible worst case scenarios. But in a PMA, it's a little bit easier than in a trust because you can have options of amendments to your articles or bylaws. The other thing with a PMA is that it is a trust, basically. Board is they're actually called trustees, but you are automatically declaring separation of church and state. As long as you can stand on that, there's not really much else. To me, is a lot easier to defend, especially in commerce situations. Mostly with PMAs, I've heard about like FDA ratings and stuff like that. Not so much, I haven't heard of any IRS confrontations with PMAs. I've only heard of FDA rating raw milk farmers. It is recommended that there are 3 trustees just for voting purposes, that there is a tiebreaker vote. One issue that I've had with a PMA, with banking purposes, PMAs are far less common. Like, we were very particular. We researched a bunch and we decided on a credit union. After we opened our bank account with them, they are changing their policy and they're no longer accepting unincorporated associations. That is my experience with PMAs. It is similar to trusts, and just like a business, you run it like a business where you have, keep track of your minutes. You have company meetings. Keep track of what was discussed. Keep track of your expenses, accounting, all of that jazz. Just like you would a business, just like you do your household. All right, now my experience with trusts. I started putting all of my assets into a trust, a private irrevocable trust, in January. And thankfully, right afterwards, I had a squatter. Man, that was a hassle, but I got the squatter out in 2 days with the house being in a trust, whereas my aunt, it took 5 months to get her squatter out the legal route. So under equity, what we all know is fair and just. And that squatter tried to get me in trouble with the city after the fact, and the city was like, well, you have to take out your second kitchen and otherwise you'll get a fine. And I said, hey, I'm not the owner of the house, I'm just the trustee. I never heard from the city again. That level of protection, that kind of legal protection, whereas it has given me a lot of confidence with renters and just in knowing which jurisdiction I'm standing in, and knowing that most people most public servants, they don't know about trust. They definitely don't know about trust law. With trust, though, I did not comprehend how to properly operate and run and everything that was needed for a trust. I was given this, very complex, awesome, beautiful binder trust, but I didn't know the full power of it. So I started researching on my own, started reading The Art of Passing the Buck books, and actually went down and hung out with Gwen for a few days. She is one of the leading authors and researchers of the Art of Passing the Buck books. Now she is one of my women tours, and I get to pick her brain, especially about private, irrevocable family trust, like what the Kennedys and Rockefellers and all of those bloodline families, how they operate. They don't just have families, they operate in trust. That means you have to trust each other. So they operate as a business. I just love her concept of, you have a managerial trust, and then it has subsidiary businesses, and the goal is that the family is dependent on each other, not for resources, for roof over their head, for food, for emotional dependency, for education, all of that, rather than sending them off to public school, because you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And when the government is the number one hand that feeds you, you're less likely to see the corruption, and you can't do anything about it. So this takes the onus of power off of exterior and really takes it on as a family unit, as tribes, like we did for thousands and thousands and thousands of years before families were broken apart or our gold was taken away, the Great Depression. And you guys know the story. The biggest thing that I learned with trust is that my trust that I put my house in, yes, it gave me legal protection as far as a squatter and everything, but I do not feel confident standing on the tax protection of this trust. I've since learned in the Art of Passing the Buck books and through Gwen about adverse trustees. So with a trust, you really have to prove that the grantor has no control, that they totally signed over all rights, power, and decision making to trustees, that they are not employees, they are not family members, they are not by marriage. Like, the grantor has no pull over the trustees. That is how you really make a strong trust, especially against the IRS. Didn't know this. I'm the grantor and the trustee. I knew that you could be two positions. This is not a private irrevocable trust anymore. This is a grantor trust. I, as the grantor, and since I have the main control as the trustee, I could be held liable for taxes still. In that respect, this is the biggest difference between trusts and PMAs from my research and my comprehension. With a trust, it is always the IRS. That is what has given us a glimpse into these private trusts publicly, is when the IRS has had any issues with them. Gwen has read, her and Richard McDonald would read every case that they could find regarding the IRS and any kind of big name family trust. To defend a trust, really it comes down to proving that the grantor absolutely has no control. Adverse trustees that have taken over, there has been no actionable events that should move this private trust into the public. Like, for instance, no taxable events. Like, as a trustee or a protector, you need to be able to stand in these things, and you need to know all of the expenses, the ins and outs, so that you can confidently say to any public servant, quote, authority figure that tries to intimidate you into making any aspect of your PMA or trust public when it is an unincorporated private matter. That's what it all comes down to. They cannot force you to go into the public at all. So I hope that my years of research has been helpful to you and helps you decide which private association is best for you and your circumstance. Till next time, lovelies. Just a little fun personal touch here today. This is one of my favorite things I've ever created. All of these dots are men and women that have visited my family home from around the world.